Chapter 28. In their decadency, these Virginians practice an elaborate folly of courtly love, unmodified since the Dark Ages, so relentlessly that at length they cannot distinguish fancy from the substantial world, and their folly absorbs them into itself. They gaily dance the steps their African slaves teach them, whilst pretending to an aristocracy they seem only to have heard rumours of. Their preferred sport is the duel. Part of the definition of gentleman in these parts seems to be ownership of a matched set of pistols. To anyone who has observed slave keepers in Africa, it will seem all quite ancient. Lords and serfs, a Gothic pursuit. What in our corrupted days has become of knights and castles, when neither is any longer reasonable or possible? No good can come of such dangerous boobyism. What sort of politics may proceed herefrom? Only he that sows the seeds of folly in his world may say. From Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, Spiritual Daybook. Colonel Washington turns out to be taller than Dixon, but by about as much as Dixon rises over Mason. Enable us to quite nicely to stand in a shed if we keep a straight line, he greets them, though I wonder why. In this province of the unreflective, if the colonel serves not as a focus of sobriety, neither is he quite the incompetent fool depicted in the London press, rattling on ever so jolly about the whiz of enemy shot through the air, though how mean-spirited must we be to refuse slack in the sheets of manhood to a gangling sprig, sighting one day through the eyepiece of a surveyor's instrument upon a plummet string, the next down the barrel of a rifle at a Frenchman. In his mature person, though he will seem from time to time to allow his gaze to refocus upon something more remote, yet 'tis as little fidgeting as reverie, something purposeful rather, allowing him to remain attentive to the topic at hand. When he hears Dixon speak, he smiles, though owing to the state of his teeth, he is reluctant to do so when in company. A smile from Colonel Washington, however tentative, is said to be a mark of favour. My people come from your neck of the woods, I think, for I've relatives who talk the way you do. Dixon cups an ear. Happen I hear a fading echo of the old pitman's lilt? The colonel shrugs. Up in Pennsylvania they tell me I talk like an African. They imagine us here surrounded with our tithables, insensibly sliding into their speech, and so it is implied into their ways as well. Come, observe this picture upon the table, an excellent punch, the invention of my man Gershom. Out on the white-columned porch, tumbler in fist, the large Virginian wants to talk real estate. Sometimes a man must act quickly upon an opportunity, for in volatile times the chance may never come again. Just for example, there is a parcel out past the South Mountain I'd like you to take a look at when you go by. Your line, as I project it, passing quite close. Spotted it early in the war. Kept it in mind ever since. No reason you fellows shouldn't turn a shilling or two whilst you're over here. And have ye considered how much free surveying you'll be giving away? as the West Line must contribute north and south boundaries to pieces innumerable. Don't suppose you have a copy of that contract you signed? Well, no matter. Yet I wonder at how you boys have stirred up the land jobbers. No one here regards the crest of the Alleghanies as the barrier it was. You've only to look at the roads. Some days the wagons in a stream unbroken, new faces and ships arriving every day. Nothing east of Susquehanna left to settle. The French are out of the Ohio. The scoundrel Pontiac is vanquished. The money is ready. Coffee houses in a frenzy of map sketching and bargaining. What deters us? General Bouquet's proclamation, Mason suggests. No new settlement west of the Allegheny ridgeline. Poe, the proprietors won't enforce that. Whence then, replies Mason, the rumor that Mr. Cresap tried to bribe the general with 25,000 acres not to proclaim his line? Perhaps, chuckles Washington. 'Twas all the old renegado dared to promise, and Bouquet may have wanted more. As no land may be had there but by his warrant, his line might make of him an American nabob. As he was not offering his services out of love for those inexpensive tokens with which he is synonymous, rather, the Lord ever merciful, as in Bengal, sent us a deliverer whose appetite for profit matches his self-confidence. 'Twas business more or less plainly dealt. The next step will be to contract our Indian wars out to mercenaries, preferably schooled in Prussian techniques, as it never hurts to get the best, though many of these hired professionals miss one payday and they're gone like smoke. Could even be just before a decisive battle. Forget it. Damn 'em, they're off. Did you imagine Bouquet or the Penns to be acting out of tender motives toward the Indians? Why else refrain from expanding west? Mildly inquires Dixon, but out of regard for the humanity of those whose homes they must invade. A motive even stronger and purer, frowns Colonel Washington, the desire to confound their enemies, who chiefly are the Presbyterians settling the West, schmoclamation, Ulster Scots, who hate England enough to fight against her, now the French are departed, though the cheerfully idiotic, who are numerous, believe such sectarian passions to lie behind us. The Ulster Scots were dispossessed once, shamefully, herded, transported, hostages to the demands of religious geography. Then, a second time, were they forced to flee the wreck rents of Ulster for this American unknown. Think ye, there will be any third coercion? At what cost, pray? Americans will fight Indians whenever they please, which is whenever they can, and Brits wherever they must. For we will be no more contained than taxed. The Grenville ministry ignore these data at their peril. Mr. Grenville, alas, neglects to consult me in these matters, says Mason. Wrote to him, adds Dixon. Tax the East India Company, why don't they? Did he even reply? As a rule here, advises the Colonel, ye may speak your minds upon any topic political, but on no account ever discuss religion. If any insist, represent yourselves as deists. The back inhabitants are terrified of all atheists, especially the Indians. though Englishmen bearing unfamiliar equipment across their land may easily qualify. Their first impulse upon meeting an atheist is to shoot him, often at close range, though some of the Lancaster County rifles are deadly from a mile off. So running for cover is largely out of the question. Besides, you cannot know what may be waiting among the trees. "What's that aroma?" Dixon blurts, knowing quite well from the Cape what it is. "Ah, the new harvest, how inhospitable of me. 'Tis but a small patch out back, planted as an experiment. If it prospers, next season perhaps we'll plant 10 acres as a market crop. With luck, between the Navy and the New York fops, we could get rid of it all, male and thimble, and see us some profit. Always a few shillings in canary seed as well, worst comes to worst. Here then, Gershom, where be you at, my man?" An African servant with an ambiguous expression appears. "Yes, Massa Washington, sir." "Gershom, fetch us, if you will, some pipes and a bowl of the new cured hemp, and another gallon of your magnificent punch. There's a good fellow. Truly, gentlemen, an Israelite in whom there is no guile." Mason, recognizing the source as John 1:49, actually chuckles, whilst Dixon rather glowers. "At Raby Castle," he informs them, fizz aflame. "Darlington liked to joke of his steward, my great-uncle George, using that same quotation from the Bible, yet only from our Saviour. Surely might such words be allowed to pass, without raising suspicions as to the amplitude of spirit. From the Earl of Darlington, the remark was no more than the unconsidered jollity one expects of a castle dweller. But to hear it in America is an enigma I confess I am at a loss to explain." "Good sir," the colonel smiting himself repeatedly upon the head, unto knocking his wig askew. "I regret providing the text for an unwelcome association." He snatches the wig completely off and bows his head, cocking an eye at Dixon. "The two conditions are entirely separate, of course." "I'm a Quaker," shrugs Dixon. "Dixon, what am I supposed to do? Call thee out?" "Don't bother about that Israelite talk anyhow," Gershom coming back in with a tray. "It's his way of joking. He does it all the time." "Thou aren't offended?" "As I do happen to be of the Hebrew faith," tilting his head so that all may see the traditional Jewish yarmulke attached to the crown of his peruke in a curious display of black on white, "it would seem a waste of precious time." "Say, and cook," beams George Washington. "Gersh, any them kasha vanishkis left?" "Believe you ate 'em all for breakfast, Colonel." "Well, why don't you just whop up another batch? Maybe fry us some hog jaws. Hip it slide on down. One big mass of hog jaws coming right up, sir." "Wait a minute," objects Mason. "Do the Jews not believe that," glancing over at Dixon, "the article you speak of is unclean and so avoid scrupulously its flesh?" "Please, you don't think I feel guilty enough already? As it happens, the sect I belong to is concerned scarce at all with dietary rules." "Of any kind," adds the colonel, having inhaled mightily upon his pipe, whence now arises another aromatic cloud. "Yet if a Jew cooking pork is a marvel, what of a Negro working a room? Yes, my oath, here is Joe Miller resurrected. They applaud him round a circuit of coaching inns upon the roads to Georgetown, Williamsburg, and Annapolis. Indeed, he is known far and wide as a theatrical artist of some attainment, leaving him less and less time for his duties here, not to mention an income per annum which creeps dangerously close to that of his nominal master, me. He passes the pipe to Dixon. He wants me to put in Dismal Swamp Land Company shares, Gershom advised. How would you gentlemen advise me? Mason and Dixon make eye contact, Dixon blurting, "Didn't they tell us?" Mason going, "Shh, shh." Washington, meanwhile, trying to wave Gershom back into the house. Gershom, however, has just taken the pipe from Mr. Dixon. "Thank you," and hails presently. "Well, how are you, gentlemen? You having a good time? That's quite some coat you're wearing, sir. It certainly is red, isn't it? And those silver buttons, mighty shiny. Tell me, seriously now, you were planning to wear this out in the forest?" Why, aye. Actually, bright red. It's quite a la mode out there, seen rather often down the barrels of cheap rifles. You'll be very popular with all kinds of folk. Delawares, Shawanese, Seneca. Seneca fancy a nice red coat, so." Passing the pipe to Mason. "I can see which one's the snappy dresser. Whilst the Indians are shooting at him, the Presbyterians'll be after you, thinking you're something to eat. It's a buffalo, I'm telling you, mon. Hush, Patrick, it seemed but a squirrel to me, so it's a squirrel. Pow!" "Obliged, of course," squawks Mason. "Ever so kind to imagine for me my death in America. Need no longer preoccupy myself upon the matter. Yet kind, yes, and withal a great relief." Gershom turning to Dixon. "Is he always like this, or does he get indignant sometimes?" "You see what I have to put up with," groans Colonel Washington. "It's making me just me shuggana. Here, a bit of to bowl with that." "George?" Oh, stay calm. It's the wife. "Just let me do the... my treasure. Excellent gown, handsome stuff. Allow me to present," and so forth. Mrs. Washington, "Oh la la, call me Martha, boys," is a diminutive woman with a cheerful rather than happy air, who seems to bustle even when standing still. At the moment she is carrying an enormous tray piled nearly beyond their angles of repose with tarts, popovers, gingerbread figures, fried pies, stuffed doughnuts, and other units of refreshment the surveyors fail to recognize. "Smelled that smoke. Figured you'd be needing something to nibble on," the doughty Mrs. W. greets them. The task usually falling to that agent of domesticity unrelenting, the wife. "As none of you could run a house for more than 10 minutes in the world wherein most of us must dwell without anarchy setting in." "I was supposed to be watching a pot upon the fire," sighs Washington. "Matters more immediate claimed my attention, one giving rise to yet another till a certain odour recalled me to the pot. Alas, too late. Another ruinous flaw in my character, perhaps one day to be amended by me, though never to be forgiven by my lady." She shakes her head, eyes yawing more than rolling. "George, have a cookie." He takes a molasses gingerbread man, closely examines its reverse as if to assure himself that his wife hasn't somehow burned it, and is about to bite the head off when something else occurs to him. "Now you may have heard of the Ohio Company. a joint venture in which my late brothers had a few small shares. There we were, as deep in the savage state as men have been known to venture. Often no clear line of retreat, a sort of, Marth, my nosegay of virtues, what's a piece of tricky weaving? How, she replies, pray would I know, am I a weaver? A piece of tricky weaving, the Colonel has tried to continue. Order, in chaos, markets appearing with their unwritten laws upon every patch of open ground, power beginning to sort itself out, line and staff. Mason and Dixon, in arranging for a fair division of labour, have adopted the practice, whenever two conversations are proceeding at once, of each attending one with location usually deciding who gets which. So it falls to Mason to defend his profession against what he suspects is Mrs. W.'s accusation of unworldliness, whilst Dixon must become enmeshed in Ohio company history. With our own forts at Wills and Redstone Creeks and a communication between, as the East India Company hath its own navy, why, so did we our own army. Out in the wild anarchy of the forest, we alone had the coherence and discipline to see this land developed as it should be. Rest easy that the old O.C. still exists, the Colonel is protesting, though in different form. Sounds like the afterlife, Gershom remarks. If only we could have gotten the language we wanted in the charter. The tale might have been different, but our friends at court are few, and now and then invisible, even to us. They failed to get the Bishop of Durham clause, puts in Gershom. Look ye, wasn't it like iron plate upon a steam boiler for everyone else? Virginia, the Calverts, the Penns, Ohio by precedent surely is entitled to one. All respect, Colonel, those grants, Gershom points out, were more like fantastical tales drafted in the days of some kings who were not altogether real themselves. 'Twas a world of masking then, fictions of faraway lands. What did they care? Bishop of Durham clause, no problem with that. How can we set you up a Palatine residence? 'Tis yours. You like cedar shakes, brick, traditional stone approach, whatever, it's fine. What's that? You want to put in a what? A harem? Why, to be sure, and how many ladies would that be, sir? Of course you've a choice. Lord Smedley, the catalogue, please. Any Bishop of Durham clause in America, says Dixon, suggests a likeness in the British mind between your Indians west of the Allegheny Ridge and their Scots beyond Hadrian's Wall. As the bishop prince's half of the bargain is to defend the king against whatever wild cannibal host lies north of us, whose nightly bagpipe music in the time of the 45 could easily bring all within earshot to insomniac terror by dawn. Why, sir, exclaims the Colonel, you might be describing a camp upon Monongahela, and the death hollows all night from across the river, the long watchfulness listening to the brush, every miserable last leaf, the darkness implacable, when you gentlemen came to stand at the boundary between the settled and the unpossessed, just about to enter the deep woods, you will recognize the sensation. Yet we sought no more than to become that encampment in the night, that small refuge of civilization in the far wilderness. Trouble was, so had the French, Gershom remarks. Thank ye, Gersh. Mason, meanwhile, is embarked upon an apologia for astronomy and his own career therein. The dispute is at least as old as Plato. Indeed, I feel like Glaucon in the seventh book of the Republic, nervously listing for Socrates all the practical reasons he can think of for teaching astronomy in the school. Let's see, then. Do I feel like Socrates? Alas, sir, I think not today, nor Mrs. Socrates neither. That no doubt otherwise excellent lady, being, as I am told, far too busy with shrewish pursuits to bother with her kitchen, and thus scarcely able to suggest to you, for example, this excellent apricot tart. Mason is not sure, but he thinks he has just detected a certain cilial excursion. Obliged, ma'am. All lens fellows, recognize that our first duty is to be of public use. Oh, the raspberry too, then, thank ye. Even with the palms currently in eclipse, we all must proceed by way of the established routes, with every farthing we spend charged finickingly against the royal purse. We are too visible up on our hilltop to spend much time among unworldly speculations, or indeed aught but the details of our work, focused in particular these days upon the problem of the longitude. Oh, and what happened to those transits of Venus? There we have acted more as philosophical frigates, ma'am, each detached upon his commission, whilst the everyday work of the observatories goes on as always, for the task at Greenwich as at Paris is to know every celestial motion so perfectly that sailors at last must trust their lives to this knowledge. Here, the colonel beams, more fame attaches to the transits. Observers stationed all round the world, even in Massachusetts, treasuries of all land pouring forth gold, every astronomer suddenly employed, and all to find a true value for the earth's parallax. Why, most of us here in Virginia wouldn't know a parallax from a pinwheel if it came up and said, "How'd you do?" Yet was it what a rage it was, the transit of Venus wig that several women were seen wearing upon Broad Street, husband. Do you remember it? A little round knot against a great white powdered sphere. And that transit of Venus pudding, same thing, a single black currant upon a circular field of white. And the sailors, with that miserable song. "'Tis time to set sail," sings the colonel. "Farewell, Portsmouth ale, ta-ta to the gay cantinas. For we're off, my girl, to the end of the world, to be there ere the transit of Venus. She's the something, goddess of love," Martha, in a pleasant though impatient soprano, "shining above, without a bit of meanness. Though we'll have no more fun till she's crossed o'er the sun. 'Tis ho for the transit of Venus." Colonel Washington joining her for the bridge. "Out where the trade winds blow, further than sailors go. If it's not ice and snow, 'twill be hotter than hell, we know. So, wave to your dear, stow all your gear, and show a bit of keenness. Bid Molly adieu, she isn't for you, for you're for the transit of Venus." By the last 4 bars they are facing and gazing at one another with an affection having to do not so much with the lyric as with keeping the harmony and finishing together. Gershom is presently telling king jokes. Actually, the slave and master jokes retailored for these audiences. King says to his fool, "So tell me honestly," King, "tell me honestly, what makes you willing to go about like such a fool all the time?" Hey, George, says the fool, that's easy. I do it for the same reason as you, out of want. What, goes the king, how's that? Why, you for want of wit, and I for want of money. The king is jesting with his ambassadors. Damn, he cries, if you don't look like some great dishevelled sheep. Ambassador replies, I know that I have the honour several times to represent your majesty's person. The king, merry but distraught, asks leave of those at his table to toast the devil. Why, says the fool, where that gentleman resides, he is already well toasted. Yet I could never object to one of your majesty's particular friends. The king takes a long coach ride out into the country and decides to walk back to the palace in company with his fool. Growing at length fatigued, they learn of a farmer they meet that they've 10 miles yet to go. Maybe we'd better send for the carriage, says the king. Come on, George, replies the fool. We can do it easily. 'Tis but 5 miles apiece. Gershom follows these by singing Hava Nagilah, a merry Jewish air, whilst clicking together a pair of spoons in syncopation. 'Twas Celeron de Bienville who began the dispute in 49, recalls the colonel later, when he voyaged south from Canada, landing upon the shore of Lake Erie, following French Creek to the Allegheny, where, to assert France's claims, he buried a lead plate bearing the royal seal, thence by bateau to the Ohio and down it, past Allegheny, Beaver, Fish Creek, Muskingum, Kanawha, Scioto, planting as he went these leaden flags at the mouths of each stream in turn. Lead? Dixon curiously. A memorandum, it seems to Mason, of other uses for the metal, such as shot, another expression of that famous French contempt, not only to be prodigal with a base material, but to bury it in the dirt and the dark, as if that were the only way an Englishman might notice it. Oh, sir, likely was practicality, beams Washington, lead being cheaper than silver or gold, and kept out of the air that way, quite durable as well. Any metal in the form of a plate, Dixon muses, or disc, might plausibly have an electrical purpose. Have a word with Dr. Franklin, offers the colonel. He'll know. Electricity again. Mason gestures at his partner with his thumb, shaking his head morosely. Aye, 'tis the topic that most provokes his disorder. Quite harmless, of course, comes over him without warning. Quite harmless, of course, comes over him without warning. Suddenly he's on about his favourite fluid, and no stopping him. Even Dr. Franklin can shed no light, the best physicians of the Royal Society. A shrug, baffled. We but hope one day he may regain his senses. A childhood misadventure with a torpedo, Dixon, with a brief move of his head towards Mason, confides. Thus, his sensitivity to all references to the, whispering, electrical. Shocking, Gershom remarks, and Mrs. W. beats Tatamama smartly upon the tabletop, whilst the colonel holds his head as if it ached. Yet not dazed enough, Mason assures the company, nor too young, to miss recognizing in the torpedo 5/6 of whose length it is taken up with these electrical plates, the principle of all these structures, which is that you must stack a great many of them, one immediately upon the next, if you wish to produce any effect large enough to be useful in, let alone noticed by, the world. Aye, Dixon, well might you wag your head. Wag away, may it circulate some sense. For what possible use a single plate, lead or gold, buried in the earth is beyond me. Perhaps only beyond your sensorium, how feeble, replies Dixon. As were the heavens, you may recall, but a short while ago, before telescopes were invented. Why may not these plates collectively form a telluric-laden pile, if not for storing quantities of simple electric force, then to hold smaller charges, easily shaped into invisible symbols, decipherable by means surely available to those philosophies? I fear the only message upon those discs was a challenge, sir, a provocation, asserts Washington. The survey is equivalent of a slap from a glove. And yet, speculates the Reverend, what else? There remains a residue of belief, out to the westward, that the mere presence of glyphs and signs can produce magical effects. For of the essence of magic is the power of small magical words to work enormous physical wonders, as of coded inscriptions and fables, once unlocked, to yield up treasure past telling. So seals become of primary moment, and their precise descriptions often matters of life and death. For one letter misplaced can summon destruction, immediate and merciless. You saw such plates? I dug a few of 'em up. Eyes etched in crimson, the Colonel is grinning at Dixon meaningfully, whilst Mrs. Washington grimaces in warning. But Gershom is already on the way to fetch the mementos, calling me mischievously, "Coming right up, sir, bunch of dead weights, beg pardon, lead plate. What'd I say? Practically new, original soil yet in place. Does the gentleman know how to divert guests?" What immediately draws Dixon's attention is not the royal seal of France, but the markings upon the reverse side. "Bless us, 'tis Chinese." Chinese. Remarkable, sir. The only Europeans who recognize such writing seem usually to be the Jesuits. Excuse me. Dixon immediately upon the defensive. Problem here, Colonel? Depends, the Colonel replies with a pause whose heft all can appreciate. Are you a travelling man? Why, aye. Dixon having learned of the Masonic password from a lodge member in Philadelphia. And I'm travelling west? West? Oh, ha, ha. Well, and so you are. Look ye, 'tis simply this, that from time to time a Jesuit up north in Quebec will put off his skirts for breeches and come across the border in disguise to work some mischief down here. So a fellow has to be extra vigilant, is all. Report everything to the lodge, so that somebody there can piece together a great many small items into a longer tale. Perhaps even trace the movements, day to day, of these sinister intruders. Speaking as Postmaster General, Dr. Franklin will later amplify back in Philadelphia, I see our greatest problem as time. Never anything but time. For any message to reach its recipient, we must reckon in a fixed delay, months by ship, days over land, whilst via the Jesuit telegraph they enjoy their damned marvel of instant communication. Far-reaching and free of error, thanks to giant balloons sent to great altitudes, mirrors of not to mention diabolical perfection, beams of light focused to hitherto unimagined intensities. So, at any rate, say the encrypted reports that find their ways to the desks of highly placed men whose daily task it is to make sure they know everything appropriate to their places that must be known. As expected of a Jesuit invention, timing and discipline are everything. It is rumoured that the fathers limit themselves to giving orders whilst the actual labour is entrusted to the telegraph squads, elite teams of converted Chinese drilled through Loyalin methods to perform with split-second timing the balloon launchings, to learn the art of aiming the beam and its reflection once acquired, to keep most faithfully fixed upon it. For like the glance of a woman at a ball, it must be held for a certain time before conveying a message. So we ever lag behind them, by gaps of time none of us knows how to make up. If we could but capture one machine intact, we might take it apart to see how it works. Yet what use? They'll only invent another twice as fiendish, for here are conjoined the two most powerful sources of brain power on earth. The one is closely harnessed to its disciplined rage for Jesus, as the other to the escape into the void, which is the very Asian mystery. Together they make up a small army of dark engineers who would ruin the world. The Sino-Jesuit conjunction may prove a greater threat to Christendom than ever the Mongols or the Moors. Pray that more than their quarrel over feng shui divides them. End of chapter.